everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Write, Publish, Connect. My name is Alexa Nazzaro, founder of the Aaxel Author Group. And as you know, the goal of these interviews is to give you a glimpse into the lives and works of some of the authors we have worked with. And today I have with me Lori Joan Swick, author of the historical fiction, The Sculptor and the Saint. Thank you so much for joining me, Lori.
Oh, thank you, Alexa. It's always such a privilege to be able to share my work with the world, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Oh, no, you're very welcome. And that is exactly what we're going to talk about today. Why don't you start out by giving us an overview of the sculptor and the saint?
Well, it's actually about Saint Cecilia, which it's been a pet project of mine it's been a labor of love for almost my entire life, but I've been working on it for a lot of years. But I took Saint Cecilia as my patron saint when I was 10 years old because she's the patron saint of music. And I played the piano, and that was basically the reason. And later on, I realized that I really don't know anything about her. So I started to research her and found out some really interesting things, not only about her story, about but women in ancient religious history, Christian history. I was raised Catholic, so I was very interested in that at the time. But her story was very intriguing, very mysterious. And the more I got into reading about her and finding what little I could find out about her, she's highly celebrated in art, highly celebrated in music because she is a patron saint of music. But there's very little out there about what really her life might have been like. So this was just a big invitation for me to jump in with both feet. And I did. And I started writing the book about her, but through my research, you really couldn't get very far looking for Saint Cecilia before you would see this picture of this gorgeous statue that had been sculpted of her by Stefano Maderno, a very young man in Renaissance Rome, who was commissioned by the Pope to sculpt her likeness in death and to place it under her altar. So he gave me a really good stepping off point to show what her life would have been like, not only what it was like in ancient Rome, what I think really happened based on a lot of research, but looking back from the Renaissance when they were really highly celebrating the ancient Christian Roman martyrs, especially the virgin martyrs, and the lore and the mythology that was attached with that, and the way throughout time they were looking back at her and juxtaposed to what I think her life was really like. And it really gave me an opportunity to sort of do a full picture of the history of women in Christian history, if you will, in patriarchal religious history. So it was a labor of love. It was a lot of fun. I love art, and it gave me a chance to jump into that too. So.
You've mentioned labor of love a couple of times. So, and I know you really dedicated a lot of time to crafting this novel. Give us an overview of what that writing journey was like from beginning to end.
Okay, it's long. I'll try to give you the truncated version of the synopsis. But again, when I was very young, I fell in love with her. I was a young woman. I was sitting in a Catholic church actually, and I looked up at a stained glass window of her, and I thought, oh gosh, I want to write about her. So I started researching, which, as I said, was much easier to think you're going to do than to actually do it. But when I was doing my undergraduate work, and I started pulling together what I could find about her. And then I had the opportunity to do my graduate work at the University of Notre Dame. Well, in their archives, they had one of the few copies at that time. It's probably all over the internet now, but at that time you couldn't find it anywhere. A copy of what they call her Passion, which is the ancient story that was written of her life and death, and just what went on with her and her martyrdom, basically. So there I had it in my hands. And then I had other books, that were written in history, throughout history, about what people thought about her. So I had the actual books in my hands finally. In their archives, they had the actual accounts that were written about her by Cardinal Baronius, who was a big part of what happened when Stefano sculpted her in the Renaissance, and by Antonio Bosio, who translated her works from the ancient works to Latin while Stefano Maderno was working on this statue. So I had her in my hands, and it was I was my turn to just share her with the world. So I started writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting and working with it and loving it and, triumphs and tribulations. And then finally I got the chance to go to Rome. I had been many, many years before, but I got the chance to go back and actually visit these places, sit in her basilica, which is not only where she was memorialized, but where it is believed she lived with her husband, where she was martyred in her own bathroom, and then where her remains, as they are now, lay. So it was just so powerful to be there after all these years, just be standing right in front of this statue that Stefano sculpted instead of just looking at pictures at it. To be able to go down in the crypt and be within a few feet of where she was interred was just an amazingly powerful, moving experience for me. So that was my research process. I came back from Rome and powered through it and finished it up, and then I was ready to present it to the world.
Nice. So research, that's a huge element when you're crafting, writing historical fiction. What would be your top tip or your top two tips for other historical fiction writers who need to tackle? You were mentioning it's not, it sounds easier than it actually is to execute that research. What would be a couple of tips you would give to historical fiction writers who need to do that research phase?
Well, there are a lot of different perspectives on how to do this. I write biographical fiction. Instead of just being historical, aside from just trying to get the history correct, and going through, and there are a lot of good sources for that, which were easy to find. But since I'm writing about a real person, and since my mission in writing my books about women in religious history is to show what their lives were really like, and I have a real sense of purpose in doing that, I want to stay as true to what their lives were like. So I probably do a lot more research than most people would have to do to write a work of fiction. But it's hard. I mean, it's sometimes hard to balance, what actually happened when you don't know what didn't, to know what's fair as far as building the bridges between the two and connecting the dots. So a lot of research has to be done to try to be true to their lives as I can be, but still to make it an interesting fiction read, so it's a balancing act. But the main thing is get your facts as correct as you can. And again, there are resources for it, but it takes time.
Yes.
Mhm.
Perfect. And so when the manuscript was all done and you were ready to share it with the world, what drew you to the indie author path as opposed to doing the traditional, let me try to get an agent and book proposal and all of that?
Well, I have two other books that were published traditionally. One by TCU Press, one by Skylight Paths Publishing, which has since become Turner Publishing. But this is basically niche fiction. It's got a very targeted audience. And I felt like the appeal might not be wide enough to go to the traditional way or through a literary agent, which I would not have been opposed to. But instead of spending a lot of time trying to make that happen with this, and because I had just literally been pregnant with it for 30 years and was ready to bear it into the world, I decided to independently publish. But another reason I really wanted that experience is that I wanted to see how it worked, taking the book from what I wrote and what I edited, and I wanted to see all the different phases of the publishing process as they were happening. To be able to be more hands-on with that with your wonderful guidance it's something I think every author needs to, if not published this way, have a full awareness of. And it was very gratifying. And as I go along and I write more books, and I make decisions about how to put them out in the world, it will help me in a number of ways. So it was a good thing for me to do with this book.
And what would you say authors can gain, even those who decide to go the traditional route? What would you say would be an advantage for any author to witness and be a part of that publishing process?
Well, it's really important to know what's going on with your book. Especially, if you work on it hard, you put it out into the world, but you can also help sell it better. You can, in your next books that you write, if you're aware what's going on with it, you can make smarter choices about how you write it, how you edit it, how you review it, how you proof it. whether you independently publish, whether you publish through a traditional publisher, whether you go the agent route, at the very end, you're going to get the final reading of that book. And you need to go through and make sure that everything came together, the way that you wanted it to.
Mhm.
Independently publishing is fun. I did my first two books that I had published. I did have some say on the cover. I did have some say on the format. They were both times very kind to me and, kind of showing me what was going on, but I didn't have final say in it. And so, I mean, if that's important to you, then I think, independent publishing is really gratifying. And my first two books that were traditionally published, I mean, it's been a few years since they came out, and the world of publishing books is so much different now that I my best advice would be do a lot of research and consider what your needs are in your life with your talents, your level of needing control, and your patience level, if you will, and make the best choice for you, because there's a lot of different routes you can go now.
Cool. So one of the things that I know you have undertaken is doing podcasts,
Mhm.
finding alternate ways of connecting. And a lot of authors flirt with the idea of podcasts. They might not necessarily be doing them. You've been doing a few of them. Tell us a little bit about your experience as an author being interviewed or participating in podcasts, and a couple of little tidbits of advice to other authors who may be considering doing podcasts.
Well, I've really enjoyed it. I mean, I'm still feeling my way through it, and watching my interviews and trying to fix things. So it's an adventure. It's scary, when you do things personally. A number of things can go wrong, and some have. But I think it's good to be a real person. I started doing video blogs and just getting in front of your camera. And since what I do is niche fiction, if you will, or I want to put it a different way. That was said to me by other people. That's kind of an industry term. But what I do is very specific. And I think I have a specific audience, which I would really like to grow, but I kind of have to educate my readership as I go along. So the video blogs were really good. The podcasts are good for me. I'm not saying I'm great at it, but I have a lot of teaching experience. So it's a good way for me to present myself to the world, because I can just get up there and do my professor thing, and that's kind of one of my superpowers if I have any. So it works really well for me. But it does, the people who do your podcast too, they disseminate that to all their contacts. So it's really helped me, because my biggest learning curve with all this being an author is social media. So that's given me a little bump there. It's for me, it's very worthwhile. It works better for me than doing a lot of book signings, which is really fun. I did a lot with my first two books, but with this book, I need to reach a more universal audience, I think. So podcasting has been a very good tool and a very enjoyable tool for me. I do two a month. It's what I can handle comfortably, but there's plenty of podcast opportunities out there. So,
Excellent. Tell us a little bit about your upcoming work. I know you are an active writer. You've always got something. Tell us a little bit about your next project.
well, I've actually pretty much finished my next novel. Kind of doing some final revisions and working on it probably more than I need to, but it's just how I approach this work. But it's called The Snake Priestess, and it started when I took a trip to Crete a few years ago. And if you've ever been there to the island of Knossos, I'm sure you've seen it. Oh, I have one here. I should have grabbed her for you. But they found these little statuettes that they call it the Palace of Crete, but I think it was a temple complex. And it's this little woman holding these snakes up, and she's got bare breasts. And if you go to my website, you can see there's a picture of the projected cover on her, but they call her a goddess, and there's a lot of speculation about who she was. I mean, she was probably this was carved about 1400 BCE, so nobody's sure what she is, but she's wonderful, and there's two of them, but at any rate, I think she's a priestess. I did a lot of research, and I think she's a snake priestess, and based on a tremendous amount of research, I wrote her story because I think it's really important. And my main objective in writing this book, this labor of love, is based on really thinking, what was that ancient goddess priestess relationship like? Because we know those ancient civilizations, we're very sure now that they had a dominant goddess, and that the high priestess was probably the most powerful person, in their world at the time. So this was my exploration of what it was really like to be a high priestess in service of the goddess, in which case this high priestess she would be the conduit between the divinity and the world as they knew it in the civilization. Everything's kind of on her shoulders. So anyway, that was fun. And this book's finished. I am looking for publishing it next year. I have not set an actual date yet, but that's in progress. So for a sneak peek, do visit my website.
Yes, and that website is www.lorijoanswick.com. It sounds like a really exciting upcoming book. And again, Lori's book that she was mainly talking about today is The Sculptor and the Saint, available through all major book retailers. Lori, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience with me today.
Thanks, Alexa. I really enjoyed it.